George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
He's back! The orange man is in the White House, and the pussy hats were out in their thousands on the Potomac protesting vain protests in numbers that they never showed up in during the 4 years of wholesale slaughter and support of fascism and Nazism in the Biden era. But they've got their knickers in a twist over Elon Musk. It's all coming up here on the mother of all talk shows tonight with two of the finest guests that anyone could wish for. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
You can tell it's the mother of all talk shows, not just because it is the highest rating independent political talk show in the entire world, but because, as those of you watching on Sunday remember, we are remorselessly under attack. For people my age, what I'm about to say to you sounds terrifyingly daunting. But if I tell you that we were cyber attacked more than 40 million times in a few seconds, mainly from IP addresses in Bulgaria, what did I do to Bulgaria and Singapore? Then if you're done certain age, that might seem bamboozling to you. But younger people will know that these denial of service attacks happen to people all the time, but they don't normally happen on such a scale. That interrupted our interview with the legendary Sam Husseini. But of course, it was all captured for posterity, and people were able to catch up with it, and they have been doing in legion. And of course, when we tried to get into our email box in order to make the necessary inquiries of servers and so on, we discovered that millions of emails had been sent to our mailbox, making it useless and unable to be accessed. So we had to delete all from our mailbox. So if you are one of the innocent people, even in Bulgaria or Singapore, who wrote to us, you'll have to do it again, because the entire mailbox had to be eliminated in order that we could access it. All of this means that our new website, which should have been launched today, will instead hopefully be launched this evening during the show, so that you can all go and visit our new email, spanking brand new email website rather, unless, as I say, you're in Bulgaria and Singapore. I'm thinking of placing sanctions on Bulgaria and Singapore for the next few days, just till we get to the bottom of what happened. Anyway, to be attacked on such a scale, in such an organized way, clearly means that we are cutting through. Well, he's back. Donald Trump, full of the usual bravado, 30 pounds lighter, £1 billion richer after the launch of his Bitcoin, the Trump coin. Even I've got some Trump coin. Everyone is buying it. That's not a financial recommendation, by the way, because actually mine has lost some ground, but it will, I'm sure, make it up. But he is 30 pounds lighter, and he is looking fighting fit. Vainglory, braggadocio, ludicrous hyperbole, all the Trumpian traits were on view over the inauguration couple of days. And I must say, much as I despise them, I have to take my hat off to Biden, Harris, and co., who had to sit there on the platform whilst the orange man lambasted them, left them without a name, talked about the disaster they had been and the parlous state of the United States as a result of their administration. I suppose it's business as usual. They sat there and they listened, but they probably did not hear this main message, that centrism, represented by Biden and Harris and by Macron and by Schultz and Baerbock and by Sir Keir Starmer, is so very last decade. It is finished. This is the era of the populist. Left populists like me and Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, and right-wing populists like Nigel Farage and Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen and the rest. The centre cannot hold. It has been too much of a disaster. Why would anyone give it a renewed mandate? Why would anyone want 4 more years, 5 more years of what we've all been through these last 4 years, 5 years, 10, 15, 20, 25 years? Why would anyone want more of the same? And that's the lesson that I'm sure the Democrats have not learned. Certainly the British Labour Party has not learned it. Reports are coming in this evening that Donald Trump is indeed going to reject the nomination by Keir Starmer of the twice dismissed and utterly discredited friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Lord Peter Mandelson, as Britain's putative ambassador to Washington, D.C. There is no rational explanation as to why such an unforced error was committed by Keir Starmer. There is no logic to the British diplomatic service with generations, centuries actually, of diplomacy under its belt. They do diplomacy well because a diplomat is a man sent to lie abroad for his country, and they are very, very, very good liars. So they had a legion of people they could have picked to send to Washington, but they picked a man twice sacked for corruption from the Tony Blair government. You have to be pretty corrupt to be sacked for corruption by Tony Blair. And a man who, even after his criminal conviction for child sex trafficking, still maintained a bosom buddy relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. There is no reason, no rational reason why Starmer did that. And therefore, there must be a darker reason. And as I understand it, there are many journalists in England, those who still exist, who are busy unearthing the reason why. Watch this space on that. Now, Donald Trump is a man who should be judged on his actions rather than his words, partly because his words contradict themselves, sometimes even in the same sentence. He declared that Spain was a member of BRICS whilst signing executive orders and taking a press conference at the same time. Joe Biden couldn't have done that. But if Donald Trump really believes that Spain is a member of BRICS, man, we've got problems, because that indicates that the people who are briefing him are just as stupid as the people who were briefing the now departed administration of Biden and Harris. You know what a BRICS nation is, don't you, Mr. President? It's a nation that's in BRICS. Spain is not in BRICS. Ergo, it is not a BRICS nation. So don't go threatening them with sanctions or anything, because they are not guilty of that which you alleged. And his talks about Russia have been a mixture of good and bad, just like everything that Donald Trump says. Everything he says contradicts that which he said perhaps even half an hour before. But it's what he does that matters. And here's what he's done. Before even getting a chicken McNugget unloaded onto the desk of the Oval Office, he brought about a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, it might not last. And he maybe only did it because he'd quite like a condominium there in the best part of the country with the best weather, as he extraordinarily opined again in the Oval Office just earlier today. Now, it isn't actually the best weather, and it is entirely toxic, and anybody who bought a condominium in the Gaza Strip right now would have to be pretty foolish indeed. But the facts are, for the first time in 16 months, there is no child, no woman, no man having American bombs and missiles tear them to pieces as they shivered in the tents in which so many hundreds of thousands of them are now sheltering. The aid vehicles that Egypt could have allowed in at any time if they had the guts to do so are now flowing in 900 trucks yesterday. The horror of a genocidal frenzy of killing, which has killed, maimed, and mutilated hundreds of thousands of people. Dr. Abu Sita, the celebrated British surgeon who has several times been inside Gaza over the last 16 months, carrying out operations by candlelight, carrying out operations without anesthetic, amputating children without anesthetic. He says that 16% of the population of Gaza has been murdered. That's why we call it genocide. I know that that word doesn't cross the lips of the so-called corporate media in Britain and in the United States. I know you get thrown out of the BBC studio mid-interview if you use the G word. But any frenzied killing of 16% of the entire population of an area cannot be described in any other way except by the even more exceptional word Holocaust. Israel and its American and British and other satrapy allies have committed a Holocaust in Gaza, and we will never, ever allow them to forget it. And neither will an entire generation of hundreds of millions of people around the world. Israel has died in the hearts and minds of decent people everywhere, and it will never be revived. It will be kept on life support for sure. But if the people of Gaza are no longer being slaughtered, for the time being, the people of the West Bank are being slaughtered instead. The frenzy of killing has simply moved, and Israel is now attacking with fighter jet aircraft. Fighter bombers are dropping bombs on, get this, their own country. Yeah, you see, they insist that the West Bank is their own country. Indeed, the new Donald Trump appointee to the United Nations as ambassador this day said that Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank, and she called it Judea and Samaria. A biblical right. Well, property deeds don't come any more modern and up to date than a biblical title to a territory. She believes there's no such thing as a Palestinian, something which even Israeli leaders stopped saying, if not stopped believing, more than 30, 40 years ago. But the US ambassador to the UN believes that there is no such thing as a Palestinian. Can you believe it? So the slaughter has moved to the West Bank, but so has the resistance. There is no point in a ceasefire in Gaza and an absolute escalation of all-out war in the West Bank because, well, it'll be resisted by all the people that resisted the slaughter in Gaza. And you won't have solved any problems at all, President Trump. But if I sound happy that Trump is in the White House rather than Kamala Harris, I am happy that it's Trump rather than Kamala Harris. I'd much rather it had been Dr. Jill Stein, but that was not to be. But I'm certainly happy that it's Trump rather than Harris. Why? Well, for one reason only. See, I have a confession to make. I don't care what Trump does inside the United States of America. I accept absolutely that the American people have the right to decide through their democratic process who can come into their country, who must get kicked out of it, who will be allowed to sit in a cage at the border, who will be stopped by a wall, who will be subjected to the reactionary, though in many cases it may be. That's not my business. And it's not the business of anybody else other than the American people. But I'm glad Trump's in for one reason only. Because my number one overriding, dwarfing any and all other considerations is to stop World War III. Because, you see, if we have World War III, there will be no Palestinian cause. There will be no racism, sexism, misogyny, or any of the other ogenies or isms to argue about. If there is a nuclear war, it will be the end of all humanity, and all other questions will be rendered instantly otiose in a nuclear flash. And Trump is going to stop World War III. He has said so. Now, he's already begun to bargain about that. And the opening gambits in his bargaining leave me thinking, as I just said, that the same guys are doing the briefing. He threatened Russia today with sanctions. He'll sanction them if they refuse to make a deal. But trade between the United States and Russia is absolutely minuscule. And stopping all of it could make no difference whatsoever. He said the Russian economy was in trouble, but it's the opposite of in trouble. The Russian economy is in rude, rosy-cheeked health. It's the economy of the Western countries that sanctioned Russia that are in trouble. Sanctions have helped Russia. Russia is living better and a more healthy life and is already the most sanctioned country in the world. So, Donald, you don't actually have that tool to bargain with. And you certainly don't have the wherewithal on the battlefield to stop the remorseless, day by day, hour by hour advance of the Russian army. Trump says that European forces entering Ukraine is a non-starter. Let that be a lesson to you, Macron, Starmer, Schulz, and the rest. Last time, a couple of European countries tried to defy the United States and send their armed forces anywhere was at Suez in 1956. And within 3 days, the United States had made it plain that it would tolerate no such adventurism from its client states, from its protectorates, from its satrapies. So don't try it, Starmer. Don't try it, Macron. The Americans won't be with you, and your troops will be slaughtered by the Russian army and its hypersonic weaponry. Well, there's so much to be going on with, and when you've got Chris Hedges coming up as your first guest, well, you better get out of this monologue. I'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Hello, George. I heard Neil Kinnock commenting on you losing your seat, okay? I was disgusted and amazed at what he said. He was like an ignorant football supporter. He actually punched his fist in the air, saying he was delighted that you were gone, that you were a horrible person. That's the first thing he said. When he was leader of the Labour Party, he was conniving morning, noon and night to kick you out of the party. Now, this is before Tony Blair, and you were in good standing with the Labour Party. Mr. Kinnock, that chap just totally disgusted me. So what I think the British have to do, and the Irish and everybody else, is they need a new conversation and stop drinking Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I think all those people in British civil society, including Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Ken Livingstone, and very many more, have to have a conversation about how to wean the British and everybody else away from these Coca-Cola and Pepsi parties.
Nobody knows who Neil Kinnock is. Those who know who he is know he's the man from the Welsh Valleys that betrayed the miners. Frankly, the hatred of Neil Kinnock I wear not even as a badge of honor, a little tiny pin maybe, because pretty soon no one will have heard of him at all. But the wider subject that you raise is the important one. I don't know, Jeremy says he doesn't want to form a party. That's fine by me. I've got my own party. I'll be staying in it anyway. But what I would like him to do is to announce a new popular front, like the one that has just, I can tell you officially, won the French parliamentary elections.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Now, you get all my films absolutely free if you support us on patreon.com/George Galloway, as well as other original content. So please, if you think I'm worth a cup of tea per week in an insalubrious cafe, then please, at the end of this show, follow me for the price of a cup of tea per week on patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, as always, we have a poll. Will Trump stop the quote-unquote border invasion? Yes or no? It is pretty firmly, though not overwhelmingly, in Trump's favor. The answer yes has now got 63%, 62, and 54%. So let me know. Will Trump stop the quote-unquote border invasion? If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada. It's +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 08081 965522, and the worldwide number 00442039662625. Now, he's not, alas, got his feet under the desk at Foggy Bottom as the new Secretary of State for the United States, which he would be if I had my way. But the second prize is he's back on the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, political commentator, journalist, writer, and host of the Chris Hedges Report. Let's start with Washington, then go to our favourite place, Chris, the Middle East. In Washington, it was, as I said earlier, the familiar Trump braggadocio. The whole world was going to be in awe of them, in love with them, but if not in love with them, then in fear with them. There seems a lack of, at least public, understanding in Washington that the tectonic plates have shifted in the world, and that the United States is no longer the only tough hombre on the ranch. How did it look to you?
Yeah, I would say that's also true with the Biden administration, that they were playing a role that they no longer, that anyone else would allow them to assume on the world stage. I mean, you saw that with the constant intervention in the UN on behalf of Israel. I mean, the votes were so lopsided. And really, since this genocide began, the message has been quite clear, one that Trump, of course, intends to embrace, and that is not only is there no rules-based order, that was a fiction, but that all of those countries, the vast majority of the countries that attempt to reestablish or establish some kind of a rules-based order around the genocide are shut down by the United States, by the UK, Germany, and these countries in the global north that have been funding this genocide. And of course, it's a perpetuation of this fantasy, perhaps blown up a little more or a little more pompously expressed than it is under Biden. But there's a continuum there. And I think the United States, as it becomes more isolated, becomes more self-deluded. And that makes Trump the kind of perfect poster child for where we are.
Yes, I mean, I was watching the nominee for ambassador to the United Nations, and she was talking a language that even Israeli leaders long ago, since Oslo, have ceased to talk in. She appears to believe there is no such thing as a Palestinian people, even though on the White House lawn, the Oslo Agreement was signed between Israel and the then Palestinian leadership. She seems to believe that God gave Judea and Samaria in biblical title to Israel, when in fact under American law, as everybody else's law, this is illegally held, occupied territory. What should we make of that?
Yeah, that is the rhetorical shift, which is not insignificant. And all of these views are echoed by Mike Huckabee, who's been appointed by Trump to be the ambassador to Israel. Huckabee, of course, has also said the Palestinian people do not exist, or there is no West Bank, it is Judea and Samaria. And then that's because Trump's ideological void is filled with this Christian fascism, this magical thinking of Christian Zionism. So we don't want to paper over the fact that, for instance, Israel clearly wants to annex the West Bank. Since the ceasefire came into effect, the attacks, especially in the Jenin refugee camp, have been accelerated. Now, the Biden administration would at least pay fealty to the reality that you just expressed, but they wouldn't do anything to stop it. But now you're right. These figures in the Trump administration speak or adopt the same rhetorical fantasy or rhetorical lie that is perpetuated by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and these far-right representatives of the colonists in the West Bank, and that's the shift. But we don't want to let the Biden administration or the Democrats get away scot-free, because they were full-throated defenders of the genocide. What was the final figure? $20 billion in supplemental arms shipments and arms sales to Israel since the genocide began. But yes, it is a difference about how the Palestine-Israel conflict is described. And it's not a small difference, but on the ground, to the Palestinians in the West Bank or the Palestinians in Gaza, I'm not sure it makes much difference in terms of vis-a-vis U.S. policy.
Let me digress for a minute, taking advantage of your peerless experience in the region as a former head of the New York Times Middle East Bureau. What would be the point of annexing the West Bank? In that all of the millions who live there would presumably not be allowed to vote, and so would be the living, breathing proof of the apartheid nature of the state of Israel. What would be the point of annexing it, as opposed to continuing to merely brutally subjugate and settle it?
The same point in terms of annexing northern Gaza. It's about depopulation. The goal, and these figures like Smotrich have never hidden this, the goal is, of course, the erasure of the Palestinians, not only from Gaza, but from the West Bank, to have a quote-unquote, we can't say ethnically pure, because Jewish residents of Israel come from all ethnicities, but a quote-unquote religiously pure state. That's the goal. That's their desire. Whether they can achieve it or not is the question. They've not been able to achieve it in Gaza. They will create a humanitarian crisis in southern Gaza of such catastrophic proportions that they hope that there will be pressure on countries, in particular Egypt, if they can make it happen, to expel the people from Gaza. But they have the same demented vision for the West Bank. So I think it's a step towards that ultimate desire, that ultimate end, which is to depopulate, to eradicate Palestinians from what little land they have left.
Let's turn to what I think is an even bigger enchilada, not to minimize the Middle East in any way. But I said in my monologue, the reason I'm happy that Trump is there rather than Harris, though I would prefer that neither of them were there, the reason I'm happier that Trump is there is because he has now officially stated through little Marco Rubio and through 500 public statements that he will stop World War III. that the war in Ukraine has to come to an end. In other words, he's not going to go to war against Russia, which saves us if it happens, if we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, if it's real light and not a nuclear flash, that all these other issues we at least survive to argue about. Do you share that view?
Yeah, vis-a-vis Russia, the question is how aggressive he's going to be towards China. And that's a big question. The provocations that are made by, in particular, the U.S. Sixth Fleet is quite extensive in the South China Sea. The de facto expansion of NATO into neighboring countries around China is real. There's a heavy push or belief in the Pentagon that the next war will be with China. Can Trump stop that trajectory? I don't know. He certainly has a more rational policy towards Russia and Ukraine, without question. Remember, at the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict, even Henry Kissinger, a man I loathe, of course, said that the conflict should be stopped and there should be a negotiated settlement or an exchange of land for peace, for which he was excoriated. But of course, and that's what's going to happen eventually. It could have happened before all of this. The whole policy in Ukraine was very cynical. It was a classic proxy war where the United States and its allies used Ukraine to its own detriment. They knew in the end Ukraine had no chance in a long war of attrition, as has been proven clear, but they would degrade the Russian military and isolate Putin within Europe, which they've succeeded in doing. So those were always their ends. So yes, I agree with you on Russia. I'm not as sure about China. The war industry in the United States is a self-perpetuating machine because it's about making money. That's a huge part in the expansion of NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany, coupled with hubris and of a unipolar world, but also billions of dollars in arms sales. As soon as the war in Afghanistan ended, you saw the stocks of Raytheon and these big arms manufacturers plummet. And then they got Ukraine, and so they rocketed back up. The genocide in Gaza is very good for business. It's just been military fiasco after military fiasco, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, I would put on the list, Gaza. My question is how Trump will react to the heavy pressure within the war industry to ratchet up a confrontation with China. I don't know, but I think you're right. I think on Russia, he has a policy that is far saner than anyone embraced by the Democratic Party and the Biden administration.
On China, he's made a half-decent start. No, he saved TikTok, which continues to tick and talk. He called President Xi. He plans on meeting him soon. I mean, it's only a start, but it's not a bad one, is it?
No, but the pressure within the war planners, Trump is. There are powerful institutions, starting with the CIA, that Trump is going to have a very difficult time controlling or bending to his will. So yes, I think you're right. He's. I mean, that is the one benefit of Trump. He didn't start any wars during the 4 years he was president. I mean, the war party is really, at this point, the Democratic Party. There's far more opposition to perpetual war within the Republican Party than in the Democratic Party, which has kind of flipped the traditional roles of the two parties.
It's a useful segue into my last question, and I'm grateful for your time. He said on the eve of the inauguration, he was going to open the files, not just the oldest one, the JFK, but the RFK, the MLK, and the Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think he means it?
I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to tell with Trump. He's very good at playing to the crowd, at what the crowd wants, whether the crowd gets what they want. I mean, remember, his entire administration is now filled with this coterie of obscenely rich, these billionaires who bought up all the boutique mansions in Washington. Of course, the tip of the spear is Elon Musk. So, I think his populism is a kind of faux populism. Remember, he once defended Julian Assange. He didn't do much to help Julian. So I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to predict. But there's certainly he's far more in touch, and especially one saw with the Harris campaign, completely tone deaf. It was just this vapid, celebrity-driven campaign. The Democrats have essentially disintegrated. They can't even read their own public. I mean, 66%? Or no, I think it's over 70% of registered Democrats want an arms embargo on Israel. It doesn't make any difference. I don't know is the short answer. But there are serious questions. Bobby Kennedy, until he himself was assassinated, always felt that the CIA had a hand in the murder of his brother, JFK.
Quite so. I said lastly, but I can't resist it. The Democrats don't show any present sign of learning a lesson. Is there anybody coming up on the outside rail, any kind of movement in the Democratic Party, or basically are they historically redundant?
They're historically redundant, and that has been one of the most depressing aspects of the election, in that all the postmortems, all they do is seek scapegoats. There's no self-reflection, no self-criticism, no understanding of the legitimate anger on the part of the 30 million Americans who have been victims of mass layoffs since 1996. And Biden, those 4 years of the Biden administration, I wrote at the time, were our last chance to enact the kind of New Deal reforms that would save us from a figure like Trump, a cultish figure like Trump, and the rule of oligarchs. But I look at this past election as really a battle between the corporatists, who are represented by the Democratic Party, and the oligarchs represented by the Republican Party. And they have different interests. The corporatists want the decorum. They want trade deals. They want a stability because they make investments, overseas investments that take time to come to fruition. Oligarchs want chaos. They want, as Steve Bannon said, the deconstruction of the administrative state, because it's a rentier form of capitalism. It's a parasitic form of capitalism where they put up toll booths. The more things break down, the more you need private security. Your utilities are privatized. Of course, one of the big pushes they're making is to privatize the postal service here, so we can have a disastrous postal service like you do in the UK. And it's really been the triumph of oligarchic power, which is a different kind of power. That was really at its core what this election was about.
Chris Hedges, as always, fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, writer and host of the Chris Hedges Report, a must watch. Well, look, let me take a quick break, and it's your calls all the way to the hour. Stay tuned. I don't believe that the mainland European countries give a toss about Britain, and I'm certain that the United States would not sacrifice itself for Britain. That's why I say Britain is completely marginalized. As for the Trident missiles, of course, if the United States, which has dual control over these missiles, gave permission for them to be launched, of course, they would incinerate Russian cities. But what good would that do us? Because we'd all be dead, including the people that fired the missiles. You feel me?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Trump stop the border invasion? Yes or no? Get voting on Telegram, on my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Let's take the first call of the evening. It's from England. Walter in Blackpool. Always worth hearing. Go ahead, Walter.
Yes, George, thanks for having me. I have to start, I'm afraid, on a slight note of disagreement, because I think a couple of shows ago you said that the banning of TikTok, which is, as you say, has thankfully been rescinded, was not necessarily because it's Chinese. I think it is part and parcel of the rampant xenophobia that now permeates our media and institutions, both private and public. Look, the Chagos Islands deal is in jeopardy because Mauritius has the temerity of being on friendly terms with China. Trump wants to invade Panama because it has a port with links to China. He wants to secure Greenland because the Chinese ships, they are exercising their perfectly legitimate right to circulate in its waters. Now, our Charter of the Exchequer is lambasted, not so much for crashing the economy, which is true, but trying to forge amicable trading terms with China. And now Peter Mandelson's appointment as U.S. ambassador, I have no time for him, by the way, but his position as U.S. ambassador, again, is in jeopardy because of his Chinese links. And a few weeks ago, I don't know whether it was the Daily Express or the Daily Mail or something, they even blamed China for our immigration crisis because it supplies the boats used by the traffickers. I mean, you couldn't make this up, could you?
No, you couldn't. Well, look, Walter, I mean, you make very fair points. I do believe that TikTok was banned not because it was Chinese, but because of the breakthrough that the Palestinian narrative achieved on TikTok at a critical moment. But it still would have had troubles by virtue of the fact it was Chinese in its parent company. And you'll have seen today that the first price has been paid for the rescinding of the banning order on TikTok. The words Palestine free, or free Palestine rather, free Palestine, can you hear me, Mr. TikTok? Free Palestine are now illegal words on TikTok, and your account may be taken down if you utter them. I think that makes my point, but it doesn't invalidate yours. It's true that they will blame his financial links to China. Shame on the Chinese if they have these deep financial links with Peter Mandelson. I warn them, he'll pick your pocket if he can. But the real reason for the rejection of Peter Mandelson will not be China, but will be the Epstein business and the lobbying, frankly, of people like Nigel Farage, that this will be a terrific blow to Keir Starmer. It will be a death blow to Peter Mandelson, who will forever be known as the only man in history that the Americans wouldn't accept as British ambassador, and so on. But none of the points you made are at all invalid. By the way, I think the Yanks have got Greenland. The Danish cuckolds have not been prepared to defend it. There's no Thatcher on the scene in Denmark. They're not going to dispatch a task force to hold on to their island of Greenland. They have washed their hands of it. They have said that it's up to the people of Greenland. Well, there's only 50,000 people in Greenland. And Donald Trump Jr. has already been there, and I have no doubt led them to believe, though they should count it, that they'll all be millionaires in exchange for voting to become a part of the United States of America. I don't believe they'll be able to take Panama anything like as easily. But of course, I'm not usually accused of being in second place to defending China. Gayatri and I are right at this moment making a film on the fake, bogus conflict in the South China Sea, where the neighboring countries are being suborned, bribed, blackmailed, bullied into adopting, to various degrees, postures of hostility against China. When you see our film, I think you'll like it, Walter. Comments on YouTube, you can do it just by scanning the QR code. Ben Johnson says, it's interesting how no one is talking about how the Dudski wasn't at Trump's inauguration, and Ukraine wasn't even mentioned. Indeed so. Daniel Joliffe says, what's your opinion on Trump's speech the other day? I found it weird how he claims he wants to be a peacemaker, unifier, but also says he wants Panama and to be like President McKinley. Who was this President McKinley anyway, and what was he famous for? Ben Vader sends $5 US. Many thanks, Ben. Says, Trump said the Gaza war was Israel's war. So if it's their war, why is the United States paying billions of dollars for it? And Ben, not just billions of dollars, 20 billions of dollars to Israel. They've also got to bribe the Arab countries around about Israel so as to keep them on Israel's side. So when he suspended all American aid for 90 days, pending a review, he exempted not just Israel, but Egypt and Jordan also. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Paul Moore says, make California Mexico again. Well, if Californian people want that, I'd not stand in the way myself. Luna C says, great speech outside the American Embassy this week, George. Thank you for that. We went to the American Embassy. First time I'd been at the new embassy. I must say it's architecturally a thing of remarkable ugliness. And the very first demonstration I ever attended was in 1968 outside the traditional American Embassy in Grosvenor Square. There's me on the screen there. We had a good turnout and a lot of media and 1 million views of what we said and did outside the US Embassy, which seemed to be empty, by the way. They seem to have closed down their entire operation so they could all watch the inauguration. Rebecca is in Georgia. Now, I don't know if it's Georgia, USA, or Georgia in the former Soviet Union. Tell me, first of all, Rebecca, which Georgia are you?
Are you going to be disappointed if I tell you it's in the United States?
No, I love Georgia, and I love the accent. So please, pour it all over me like honey.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much, sir. And I've been an admirer of yours for a very long time, especially your friendship with Yasser Arafat. He gave us a great hope, and you've been the calm in the storm through this time. And so I appreciate you,
thank you.
Because I have friends and relatives who are Jordanian refugees from the 40s and 60s. And my question to you is, you've already covered much of this, sir, about the possible annexation of the West Bank and the ceasefire. It may not last. I guess I'm trying to say, you say that the resistance, that is a glimmer of hope that the resistance has moved now to the West Bank. I remember when the PLO, before they were sold out with the PA, they were bought off. Do you think that might be a resurgence of the PLO to its former glory to be able to help, or will it be more of an extension of Hamas? And,
a very good question, series of questions. There are a number of variables. If Marwan Barghouti is amongst the prisoners released in this hostage prisoner swap, then he will play a stabilizing role, a unifying role, and can stop the slide into civil war in the West Bank. The so-called PA, which is neither P nor A, executed a young boy today on the streets of Jenin and have done so several times in the last few weeks. The so-called P, so-called A are nothing more than gendarmerie for the Israeli occupation. And virtually every Palestinian in the West Bank already knows that. The only social base for Abbas is the paid hirelings, armed and extremely dangerous, that he literally directly employs. Everyone else hates them. So the only person who can bridge that gap is Marwan Barghouti. If he's released, then the slide to civil war might be halted. But if he's not released, and if the PA continues its current conduct, then there will be an all-out intifada in the West Bank, and they will be amongst the casualties, the first casualties of it. I'm skeptical, as you will have seen from my question to the Honourable Chris Hedges, as to whether they'll go for direct, immediate annexation, because no government in the world could legally agree to accept that, to recognize that. They would all be subject to legal action in their own countries if they did so. The International Court of Justice has already doubled down on the description of the West Bank as illegally occupied territory, violently and illegally occupied territory, demanded that the occupation cease, and reminded the members of the ICJ that they have a legal responsibility to work for the evacuation of the West Bank of occupation forces and institutions. Now, the fact that they will not do any of those things doesn't invalidate my point that they would all be liable to prosecution in their own countries if they recognized any unilateral annexation of the West Bank. Secondly, if they annexed the West Bank and failed to stampede the millions of Palestinians who live there, they would have to decree that those Palestinians living in the newly annexed West Bank would not be allowed to vote. And thus, a brazen confirmation would be created that Israel is indeed an apartheid state. And how else do you treat an apartheid state other than with sanction, boycott, divestment, ostracism, and so on? Jordan would cease to exist if the Palestinians were stampeded across the Allenby Bridge, which is a very, very, very small bridge, and there are many millions of Palestinians in the West Bank. If they were stampeded across the River Jordan into the east bank of the river, then the Jordanian state would not be able to survive. And so there are many, many variables in this. But I pray for the return of the PLO. The Palestinians were better off under the PLO than they became under the so-called PA, and than they became under other management elsewhere in the occupied territories. But it has to be a PLO that is credibly led. It can't be a PLO that's led by the nonagenarian criminal, Mahmoud Abbas. Thanks, Rebecca. Now, if you like MOATS, but you want the compressed version, the quintessential version to listen to in the car or around the house, please download the MOATS podcast. This week, we're in the top 5 in Bahrain, Turkey, and the UAE, the top 40 in Italy and Norway, and you can download the podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. You can also listen to the weekly podcast via the MOATS.tv website, which we are launching later this evening. Let's take some more calls. Jack is in Sunderland on US politics. I told you, it's the Open University of the airwaves. Go ahead, Jack.
Hi, George. First of all, can I start by apologising profusely? About 9 years ago, I think it was on Twitter, I criticised you. It was over immigration. And you were right, and I was wrong. And when I read Tommy Robinson's book, and then I woke up and I realised what the game was, so I apologise to you, sir, and I respect you so much for being the most powerful voice in Britain. I just want to make a couple of points, George.
Thank you.
Obvious truths. What very few people are talking about, really, which I think needs to be kept in the open, is United Nations Agenda 2030 and 2050, and realising that when we zoom out and we look at the bigger picture, what we're seeing today, all of this theatre, what we're seeing today, I mean, the positivity around Trump is absolutely, I find peculiar, because all we're seeing today is theatre, which is bringing us toward, which is following the UN Agenda 2030 and 2050, which of course the end result is to bring the realisation of the Greater Israel Plan. So essentially the destruction of the West, the destruction of the Middle East, whereby poor people, Palestinians, not just Palestinians, Jordanians, people in Lebanon, are being literally massacred, all for the Greater Israel Plan. And when we look at it, when we look at what the Zionist agenda is, George, and again, nobody's talking about this, but it's all wrapped up in the UN Agenda 2030, 2050, which both of them insidiously drive us towards the realisation of the Greater Israel Plan. George, to me, this just seems so obvious. I mean, people talk about Trump, and I don't know whether I've detected in yourself that you have a little bit of sort of reservation. Maybe you might do positive things. But I want to ask a question. Putin is an absolute star of the World Economic Forum. And so is Trump and Musk and Xi Jinping and Starmer, and in fact, all of the Western leaders are members of the World Economic Forum. So I'm puzzled. I'm sitting back, and I wouldn't consider myself particularly bright. I'm a psychiatric nurse. That's all I am. And I sit back and I look at this and I think, right, a little bit of logic. If all of these guys are part of the same gang, the World Economic Forum, and they're all in the UN agendas, and they go to the same meetings every year. They're in Davos at the moment. How are we kind of picking them apart and saying, well, Putin is fighting with America and Xi Jinping's in conflict with America and the West and all of this, when in actual fact they're all work in this theatre, which is to destroy the West, destroy other areas of the world, displace people, mass immigration to the West, for instance, all planned. I don't know whether you know Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson both went to Pakistan. And they took a lot of promotional material around, and they made this grand landing, and just extended a warm, open invitation en masse to people of Pakistan to say, come to Britain, the land of immigration. And it's all part, again, of UN Agenda 2030, 2050, which has foundations that goes back before the formation of the United Nations. 1929, Pan-Europa, a book by Richard Kuno-Kalagi. Says that the future people of Europe will resemble the ancient people of Egypt. And the ancient people of Egypt are actually the same colour as I am, which is, part of the abuse I used to get is I'm a half-caste, which means I'm mixed race. But that's the intention, is to destroy the white race, destroy the black race, because Zionists believe themselves to be superior and separate. But George, how the World Economic Forum and the UN agenda?
I've got to stop you. I've got to stop you, Jack. And most people will wish I'd stopped you earlier. I think, in summary, the overarching problem I have with your narrative is that it vests superhuman powers of planning and execution to people who, I can assure you, are not capable of planning or executing the kind of the kind of scenario that you painted so comprehensively. I know them. They're not James Bonds. They're Austin Powers. They're Mr. Beans. Many things that happen are cock-ups and catastrophes rather than successfully executed conspiracies. Of course, there are conspiracies, but to imagine that there's a group of wizards, geniuses, sitting somewhere at Davos, where the takings are well down, by the way, the hookers are leaving town, the audience has moved on, voted with their feet. Davos this year is a damp squib. And I see the attraction, and I hear it in your persona, in UN Agenda 2030, 2050, WCA, WEF, three-letter patter. But none of it takes account of the fact that other people have agency, are exercising that agency, and are standing in the way of the kind of scenario that you paint. For example, they all would have loved to have broken up Russia, to have balkanized Russia, to have broken it into 10, 15 or more principalities, balkanize it, break it up, weaken it, and steal from it. They all would have loved to do that. But that wish came up against the brick wall of Putin and the Russian Federation and their armed forces, which has smashed this plan, this globalist plan, into pieces. Ditto the alliance between China and Russia, now unbreakable, now closer than any of us, certainly of my generation, could ever have imagined. China and Russia are in lockstep along a road which leads in the opposite direction to the wishes of the oligarchs gathered at Davos this week. The same is true of the Palestinian resistance. You can't eliminate the Palestinian resistance just because you wish it could be eliminated. It is a real material fact that fights and will not surrender. And lastly, the main problem with your narrative is it imagines superhuman abilities on the part of humanity's enemies, and therefore engenders defeatism amongst humanity and those who fight for it. After all, if these people were capable of doing all this planning and executing flawlessly all these plans, what's the point of standing up against them? We have to stand up against them. These governments are only in power because we allowed them to be. We either voted for them, or we didn't vote at all, or we didn't vote for the people that we should and could have voted. Otherwise, Keir Starmer wouldn't be the Prime Minister and wouldn't be in Davos, finding it difficult to hook up, if you get my drift. Now, let me take a well overdue break, because Greg J. Stoker, activist, veteran, and host of Colonial Outcasts podcast and The State of Play on Mint Press, is coming up right after this short break. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now let's get another American perspective on this big week for the people of the United States. Greg J. Stoker is an activist, a military veteran, and the host of Colonial Outcasts, which has to be one of the best names of any podcast anywhere in the world. Greg, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Apart from that, how did you enjoy the show in Washington this week?
Oh, well, I actually just recently, first of all, thank you, George, for having me on. Always a big fan of the show. I actually recently returned from Washington, D.C., where I did about 3 hours in jail for disrupting the Senate Armed Services Committee alongside Code Pink for Pete Hegseth's Secretary of Defense hearing. He's an inherently problematic candidate, just like most of Trump's President Trump now, his nominee. And the show yesterday was quite a spectacle. We're 1 day in to a new administration, and we have everybody on social media apologizing for and defending Nazi salutes. So that's fun. It's going to be a wild 4 years. I think we've seen through Trump's executive orders, he put out a flurry of them, just like every incoming president does, but they're not necessarily legally binding. There's some things that the legislature and the judiciary can do to challenge executive orders, but they're definitely statements of intent, and they control political messaging for the incoming administration. So we've seen intents to change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. We've seen more, which is not really going to help working class people at all. We've seen a new tax code that just about for every party raises taxes for everyone who makes less than $39,000 a year. I'm not sure about the exact figure. And then there's also another concerning development where they are going to designate the cartels in Mexico specifically as foreign terrorist organizations, and that has far-reaching impacts for the national security state and what will actually happen with inside the continental U.S. With this new administration going forward. So yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. I'm not sure exactly where you want to start.
Well, let me start with ontology, which is always important, as you know. Are you seriously saying that the Trump-Musk administration is a Nazi administration?
Oh, no. Not necessarily. I do think there are Christian white national elements that they've pledged themselves to, which is concerning. Then again, you know, Elon Musk has been in conversation on Twitter live spaces with AfD party in far-right Germany. He's definitely using his oligarchic power to try and influence elections and governments, even inside the United Kingdom, all throughout the globe. So there's definitely a concerning element there, for sure.
Well, the coolest of cats, Barack Obama, interfered in our Brexit referendum. So you don't have to be a white nationalist to interfere in other people's elections. The election in Romania was robbed not by little Marco Rubio, but by Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden. I just wanted to, as it were, be clear as to how you define this administration. So let me put value judgment on it. Would you rather that Biden was still in the White House, or are you therefore happy that he isn't?
Well, I'm definitely happy that neither Biden or Harris is in the White House. However, I think a lot of Americans, and I'm speaking for many people in this country, of course we're not a monolith, definitely feel despondent with the incoming administration. There are a lot of concerns over what this mass deportation plan will look like. President Trump definitely campaigned on being an anti-war candidate. I still believe he is more anti-war, at least anti-direct military interventionism than the Democratic Party. But we're seeing the ceasefire in Gaza, which he definitely, I think, was instrumental in. kind of shift focus from theaters from Gaza to the West Bank as Israel launches its new operation today, going in with a massive bulldozer effort into Jenin refugee camp. The new operation, and they're always the thing I love about IDF operation names, they tell you exactly what they're going for. Operation Iron Wall. So reinstitution of a stricter apartheid, more displacement. And I'm just concerned over the massing of oligarchic and billionaire power that I saw during the inauguration ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda. So you had three tech billionaires. You had Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Google, and all lined up right directly behind the president, in front of our elected representatives. And then behind the Clintons, if you looked at the right side, you see Miriam Adelson, the Zionist settler extraordinaire, essentially mob boss and Mossad asset, who gave $100 million to Trump's campaign. And it just seems, looking based off of open source sources, which is all we really have access to, that the ceasefire deal was brokered in exchange for more political cover from the United States and the Trump administration to have an open hand with the West Bank. Trump definitely wanted to have a bargaining chip. He's all about deals, making deals, very quid pro quo. And he wanted a victory before he even got into office. And it seems to happen. I'm very happy, delighted for my friends in Gaza, obviously. But the ceasefire deal itself is incredibly problematic. There's no
he said it's not our war, it's their war. Just making the point, all these oligarchs that you talked about, the tech oligarchs, they were all against Trump. Zuckerberg and Bezos spent years trying to get rid of Trump and censor and purge everybody that argued to the contrary. Now, it's true that they are now like lap dogs with their tongues hanging out, running alongside them, but I don't think we can hold Trump responsible for the crimes of Bezos and Zuckerberg. But you're right about the billionaires. It probably was the richest collection of people ever assembled in the United States. And it was not a pretty sight. Now, you were just arrested. I didn't know that, Greg, forgive me, at the hearing for Hedges. Are there any of Trump's appointees that you feel you can get behind, or at least not get arrested protesting about them?
I don't... Tulsi Gabbard might end up being a good pick for the Director of National Intelligence, but beyond that, from a foreign policy standpoint, there's a lot of hawkish people in his administration. His incoming national security advisor has said that under the Trump administration, the new foreign policy will be a Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And for the audience that's not that familiar with American history, the Monroe Doctrine came like 9 years after the War of 1812, and the British reinvaded the continental United States. And the Monroe Doctrine was issued essentially saying that any European or outside interference, and Russia was included in this because they were looking to go for Alaska, will be met with military arms and open hostility. And so they're reimagining this from a foreign policy perspective, based off what the incoming nominees have said, what Trump has said, as a Monroe Doctrine 2.0. And the new doctrine is mostly oriented towards China. That brings in the Panama Canal. But what we're seeing under the Trump administration, again, because their foreign policy is more discernible now than it was during the first administration, is more of a localized American continent, Western Hemisphere centric stance. So, which brings in Greenland, which brings in Mexico, and basically the Latin America. So when I say anti-war, I mean anti-hot war. I don't think he's going to start any new ones. I definitely don't see a confrontation over Taiwan during his presidency, even though the U.S. Navy is preparing for it. But yeah, I'm more concerned about more localized imperialism under the Trump administration.
Yeah, it's kind of shaping up a bit like Orwell's 1984, you know, with East Asia, West Asia, Eurasia, and so on, where blocks are continental in nature, in character. So we might have fewer dangers of intercontinental war under Trump, but it does seem that if he can, he will reassert American hegemony through the Americas and add Greenland to that. But of course, there's hundreds of millions of people in the Americas who will not go along with that. Even in, you know, little Canada, Trudeau, the Tories there, everybody was up in arms at the implied or actually quite explicit warning from Trump that Canada should join the United States, become the 51st state. And the last time I looked, Mexico contained scores of millions of very proud Mexicans that have no intention of allowing the gringo across the river to tell them what to do. Their president, Sheinbaum, very dignified and highly respectable figure, she responded very robustly to the attempt to bully Mexico. So whilst for rhetoric, Trump might be Monroe 2.0, but he might not be able to actually carry it through. What do you think?
It's very hard to determine what he will and will not do. But he's already walking back some of his rhetoric against starting an all-out, full maximum pressure campaign against the tariffs with China. You know, they're going to pause on that. So, you know, a lot of people are reactionary, seeing these executive orders come out, you know, his mass deportation plan, which is completely unworkable, declaring a national emergency along the border in Texas. I live in Texas. I'm close to the border. It's probably not really going to affect anything. Again, these executive orders are more about political messaging based off campaigns, because we remember even the infamous Muslim ban from his first administration. And yes, it did cancel about 600,000 visas and make life harder for a lot of Muslims trying to go live in America and go from America, but it was never put into effect in force because there is still civil institutions. There's the legislature and the judiciary that can put a stop on all this. So, I mean, I probably felt myself getting like reactionary seeing some of these executive orders, but we do have to remind ourselves that things will, for the time being, go along as normal as they have been within the United States. And I do think that it's concerning hearing this talk about Greenland. Obviously, Denmark's one of our closest allies, and they're mobilizing, and they're not really going to sit idly by while the United States comes in and exerts imperial influence over their territory. But it does normalize a certain language, a certain way of imagining this new America that is concerning. But then again, it does seem mostly like rhetoric.
Greg Stoker, I'm glad that they let you out in order to appear on the show tonight and that you didn't suffer unduly in the jail in Washington. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Greg J. Stoker, activist, veteran, host of Colonial Outcasts podcast. Let me take a quick break, then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri's social media roundup. Stay tuned.
George, I'm just looking at another dimension in this Gaza war conflict. Could this be a religious conflict in the guise of it's not Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism, but an ideology, a Zionist ideology, in establishing their leader that is supposed to come in the future, and they will then govern and rule.
It's in their ideology, for sure. The Zionists are no more and no less than a nationalist ideology. They have nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Anybody who thinks Netanyahu is religious hasn't looked too closely into his private life. These people are extreme nationalists, exceptionalists. Some Americans believe in American exceptionalism. Zionists believe in Jewish exceptionalism. Nobody, in truth, is exceptional. There's nothing religious about it. It's about land. It's about nationalist supremacy, ethno-religious supremacy on the land of Palestine. And the Europeans colonized Palestine in the same way that the Europeans colonized South Africa. So fitting. The victims of white European colonialism are coming to the aid of other victims of white European colonialism. And they're doing the whole world a signal service.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, most people think Trump will stop the border invasion, quote unquote, but not overwhelmingly. I would say about 60-40. So we'll have to see how that goes. Let's take a call from Canada. I mentioned them in dispatches. Lance is always worth hearing, but he wants to talk about Gaza. Go ahead, Lance.
Oh, well, I called. You had a Brazilian guy hosting last week, and I called in, but I guess just before your broadcast, I saw a French mainstream news clip, and they had brought on a young Muslim lady, and they brought her on to badger her about her religion, and of course, 3 reporters picking on this one girl trying to manufacture Islamophobia in France. And then Dr. Barghouti came on. I think he's a doctor. And I don't know. I just couldn't speak anymore. It was just too sad. And I don't know. I feel like we're working so hard to manufacture this Islamophobia. And I don't know. I guess I do feel like whatever the Palestinians are going through, because they're on the most desired land, I don't know that I feel like it really just is sort of getting started. I mean, in Israel, they're taking school buses and going up to lookouts to watch the bombing of Gaza and, show young children that this is okay. So, I don't know. I'm not asking a question. I'm just sad, I suppose.
No, get it off your chest. Thanks, Lance, for that. It is a sick European settler apartheid state, and European settler apartheid states behave like that. They did in South Africa, they did in southern Rhodesia, they did in northern Rhodesia, they did in Mozambique and Angola. These European settler states, Namibia, where Germany carried out a genocide against the people of Namibia. The Spanish colonists carried out a genocide against the original people of the Americas, including the one that you're sitting in now. And then the British colonists. I mean, I'm watching America Primeval at the moment. I'm about to watch the last episode this evening. If you want to see what the white European settler colonialists were like, just watch that. America Primeval. Now, tomorrow night, I'm on duty again at 9 p.m. UK time. It's No to NATO, and it's a live broadcast. Look at my cast. So there'll be me, Rachel Blevins, the Aussie Cossack, and Crispin Flintoff. Peace or war? That is the question. And Donald Trump is central to the answer. That's why he's up there on that rather fine flyer. I do hope you'll join me on my YouTube channel at 9 p.m. UK time tomorrow evening, Thursday. Now, Bruce is down under, so he's up early in Adelaide on Australian defence. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, how are you, George? Last time we spoke, you mentioned about Julian Assange. Well, I don't have computers and things like that, but I wrote into the local paper here and suggested that perhaps we could do a trade with the United States. Not that I believe in doing trades because that's, mafia-type stuff, but to free Julian Assange. And whether it got printed or not, I don't know, but that was my effort, all I could do at the time in thinking about it.
We were hoping that Biden would give Julian a pardon before leaving office, but I guess he didn't have any more room left on the pardon list because he had to pardon every criminal in Washington and every criminal in his own family. So he didn't get around to Julian. But Donald Trump should pardon Julian, who is free, of course, in your country now, recovering from the horrific trauma of the last more than a decade, nearly 15 years. But he hasn't been pardoned, and he should be. Go ahead, Bruce, last point.
Right, okay, just a couple of little things from the speech the other day from Trump. Basically, he treated Spain as being part of BRICS. Well, he should know that Spain is part of NATO, so his general knowledge is poor. The other thing is in relation to the Panama Canal. Yeah, it does if you're a global leader, George, and he's very old in the sense that he's a mature politician or whoever, not a young person.
Yeah, it was a senior moment, a senior moment and a blonde moment rolled into one.
The other thing I was going to say that China actually runs quite a few ports around the world, and for the countries that allow or have had this rain, like for periods in Greece and also the Panama Canal, have been extremely profitable for all concerned, including the country. Piraeus is now the biggest port in Europe, and it's a very profitable port. In terms of the Panama Canal, it's extremely profitable for the country as well as the operators. It's operated not by nations, but by the tonnage that actually passes through, and that's about all I'd like to say there on that particular message.
Well, you said it very well, Bruce. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's look at some of the comments. Antonio Cristoforo says the Americans love the smell of their own farts, and the West has got used to them and actually likes them better than their own. The rest of the world needs fresh air, and BRICS is a breath of it. How wonderful. Sully Khan says, why is the US currently building a behemoth of an embassy in tiny Lebanon? Your friend Craig Murray has exposed it. Indeed, he has. And Collie Beans says America has already contaminated a large area in Greenland with nuclear waste that wasn't even supposed to be there in the first place. So they left it for the Danes and the Greenlandic to clean up. And Schlaf Commandante says the Red Note Revolution has destroyed decades of CIA anti-China propaganda. And Akila McCann says, I totally forgot that Donald Trump banned Muslims from traveling to the US. How can we believe he will free Palestine? David is in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. Wants to talk about our good friend Abby Martin. Go ahead, David.
Hi, George. Best wishes. Thanks for letting me on again. I just wanted to talk to you about Abby Martin's latest project. She came on the show early last year and talked about it. It's called Earth's Greatest Enemy. Earth'sGreatestEnemy.com is where people can fund it. But basically, she's an amazing film producer, and Mike Preisner is also producing it as well. Early last year, there was a showing at a theater here in Portland that they did of Earth's Greatest Enemy, a 40-minute segment of it. And good God, it was so damning. I wish that every American citizen knew how much gas it took to power an AC-130 running patrol missions every other week. Like all of the waste and the pollution, destroying munitions just so they get the same amount next month in their shipment. Like it's just so damning. I highly implore everybody, if they care about the environment, the EPA is not even allowed to report on the military. I highly implore people to go to earthsgreatestenemy.com and just watch the trailer. It should be basic education for all anti-imperialists.
Well, brilliant. I of course, have seen it. I'm a great admirer, both of Abby Martin and of Mike. And her films are always terrific. So I second your motion that everyone should look at earthgreatestenemy.com. Donna is always welcome. And we've been talking about her place. It's Panama. But she wants to talk about Germany. Donna, you always surprise me. Go ahead. Aren't you worried that Donald Trump is coming to take over Panama?
Nah, we won't let him. We won't let him.
Okay.
Are you there?
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, you're on.
Oh, okay.
You're on the air.
Alrighty,
The whole world's watching.
I hope so. Well, what I was going to say is that I think there's a lot of evidence, for one, according to Seymour Hersh, that we, the United States, via ex-President Biden, blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which deprived Europe, especially Germany, of cheaper gas, oil and gas for this cold winter. Yet, not a peep out of Germany. Nobody's complaining. Nobody's pointing anything, at least as far as I've heard. And I just wonder what you think about that.
You're absolutely correct. And one has to infer that little soldier Schultz was an accomplice in the crime against his own country. He was either an accomplice or a cuckold. His bully destroyed his economy, and he didn't even point his finger at the assailant. Never mind stand up and demand justice and recompense. And that's one of the reasons why Schultz is no more. I mean, Schultz has less than a month left in office. He will be out on his ear and will never be heard of or spoken of again, except in terms of derision. Not only cuckolded by Donald Trump and by Joe Biden in particular, but by his green partner, Anna Baerbock. She absolutely has led him by the nose into a cold, freezing, unemployed, poor Germany. The workshop of the European continent, the dynamo of the European economy, the powerhouse that was Germany. I mean, I remember in 1974 driving up a hill in Frankfurt. I was there for the World Cup, following Scotland in the World Cup, and we were based in Frankfurt. I remember looking down on an industrial estate as far as the eye could see. The bright lights, the chimneys, the sparks flying, the hammers hammering. It was a joy for me as an industrial worker, a joy to behold. In that industrial estate that I was looking at and could not see the ends of, hundreds of thousands of workers, blue-collar workers, union jobs, highly paid workers. Now Germany is an industrial desert, and they did it all to themselves. That's what I mean. So the centre cannot hold, as I said in my introduction, in my monologue. The centre is utterly bust, defunct. It is bankrupt. It is detested by the vast majority of people in each of the countries where the centrists have ruled, in some cases for decades. And that's why, one after another, they're all being cleaned away. Donna, always a pleasure to talk to you. Let's close the poll. Will Trump stop the border invasion? 63% on Telegram say yes, 62% on X, 62% on the YouTube community poll, and 54% on the YouTube stream. So, Donald, it seems they believe you will stop the border invasion. Let's see what happens, shall we? Now, let's take our good friend Terence in Corby in England on British politics. Terence, welcome. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Nice to hear from you. And it's the thunder in that last comment you made on the industrialisation and the British working class, which super indemnifies what I'm about to suggest to you. Mick Lynch is to retire. Mick Lynch has come on the scene, and he's been on for quite some time now, like you. Not as long as you. I think he's done about 25, 30 years in frontline trade unionism. The only way forward for our country is to keep the multimillionaire MPs' feet to the fire, with new independent MPs springing up, and you could be the Scottish Clement Attlee. You could get Mick Lynch on board with other independents, and you could be that group that could chivvy this thing forward. Regarding America, I don't care about America. I care about Britain first and foremost. And BRICS, a great trading bloc. Why not ask them for a new Marshall Plan? Call it the Brazil Plan. Call it anything you like. Let's rebuild Britain. Let's put our NHS where it should be, funded fully for the public, free at point of use, not subsumed into an inventory for an American corporation coming in. Sunak is in California, probably working on that now. I don't care about America. I care about Britain, and you and Mr. Lynch and other independents that you're well aware of can get it together and go to the British people and say, we don't want to talk about fluff and 20-year inquiries that haven't been held. We know why they haven't been held, because the state covers up, and it's not black grooming gangs, orange grooming gangs. It's the majority of white grooming gangs. Leave that run its course through law. But for Britain, we need Britain on its feet. We need people like you, other MPs, other independents coming together as a ginger group, a strong ginger group in that House of Commons apparently, to take it forward. And Mick Lynch could be just, you might want to ask him, and he might just want a quiet retirement. But you, as I've always done for the last 4 decades, as I've told you many times, you're not a liar, you're not a thief. You were for Britain, so am I. What say you, Mr. Galloway?
Brilliant. Well, beautifully expressed. We're always open to work with others and even behind others. We don't even have to be alongside them at the front. We're happy to help prop up others. Mick Lynch did support one independent candidate at the general election, but he didn't support the others. In general, he called for a vote for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And that was very unfortunate. I suspect that he will genuinely retire, but if not, we of course are more than happy to ally with all like-minded people. We will ally with anybody for what's right, but will ally with nobody for what's wrong. We will not go along with liberal nostrums where we consider them to be anti-national, where we consider them to be against the interests of our country. For example, the current apocalyptic approach to climate change and the environment. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for recycling. I hate plastics. I recognize that the climate is changing, as it has always claimed, but I will not buy the Ed Miliband apocalypticism that the world is heading to, burst into flames and consume us all. It's much more likely to do that if we followed his policies of imperialism and war than through climate change. And like you tell, I'm old enough to remember vividly when we were told we were heading into a new ice age. Yes, in my lifetime. We were warned repeatedly by the apocalyptic Cassandras that the world was heading to a new ice age. Now it's apparently headed to a conflagration caused by climate change. Neither of these apocalyptic visions turned out or will turn out to be correct. We should keep the planet as clean as we possibly can. We should invest in renewable energy as much as we can, but we cannot depend on it. And we should not close down our own oil fields over it, not least because Britain produces an infinitesimal fraction of 1% of the world's total emissions. So beggaring the British people, rendering them cold in their houses, making them unemployed by making industrial activity null and void, even if you did that, isn't going to make a rat's ass of difference to the amount of global emissions. So we reject all that kind of stuff. And if that's the kind of stuff other people are going to lead with, and rather mislead with, it's unlikely we'll find common ground. We stand for Britain's interest. And Britain's interest lies in the skills and experience that we have as the first industrial power of the Industrial Revolution. Our skills inherited father to son, mother to daughter, are what will get us out of this slough of despond in which we are sunk. I believe the British people are a brilliant people with a reputation which, somewhat to my surprise, is still extant in many, many parts of the world. But if we go around acting as if we are the tail of an American dog, if we go around like Mussolini, threatening people with Hitler's army, in our case with the United States Army, we ain't going to make it with anyone, anyhow, anywhere else in the world. Thank you, Terry. Here's a quick promo to tell you how you can be on Have It Out with Galloway. I'm glad to say more and more of you are taking me up on that. Here's how you do it. Join me every week to Have It Out with Galloway. We discuss the great issues of the day and occasionally the odd philosophical meandering through the meaning of life. You can be on the show by contacting us at our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can be the star of the show. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I'm not sure who's on the show this coming week, but yesterday's show with Abdel Bari Atwan, the last Arab journalist, was absolutely outstanding. If you haven't seen it, please catch it on my YouTube channel. Have it out with Galloway.com. That's the place to go. Now, Gayatri's not with me, but she's with you in the show with the social media roundup. I can't take you for chips tonight, Gayatri, but what's rattling?
Let me start off with Stephanie Caro, who says, Norman Finkelstein said recently that Israel has historically reneged on previous agreements to get humanitarian aid into Gaza after previous massacres through the decades and the world ignored it. This means we have to remain vigilant and keep up the pressure on Trump to ensure that Israel holds to all its agreements. And we need to keep reminding him that ensuring the welfare of the Palestinians and not letting Israel get away with breaking these agreements is the only way for him to be remembered as a great president. Well, for those who did not tune in on our rally on Monday, that's exactly what you said. When you said outside the U.S. Embassy in London that all the good things Trump does, we applaud. All the bad things he does, we will protest. We will come back to the U.S. Embassy to protest against, especially this particular ceasefire that he brokered. So we were there on Monday outside the U.S. Embassy in Nine Elms, and Ed sends a message saying, strength to your elbow, Mr. G, and well said at the No to NATO rally, which I watched online, as many did. And from one father of a little girl to another, I look forward to showing the video to my daughter, who will enjoy watching it through the perspective of a child, i.e. not for the speeches, but for identifying with being restless at a rally of adults. Yes, that's right. That's our daughter in the back.
Very good. Yeah, in pink. And then, somewhat to my surprise, maybe horror, she ended up with a red MAGA hat on her head, which she insisted on wearing for the rest of the day and evening. I have no idea where she got it from. There she is. Make America great again. Yes, sir, that's my baby, but not necessarily my hat.
Yes, that was wonderful. Walking around London, walking around one of the more guardian areas and shops of London, in our little girl with that red head. So very quickly on the poll, I've got three comments to make on it. Trump will have room to move at home, but foreign policy is in the hands of the deep state, says Merajani. And Terry Williams says, I think he will stop the invasion, but not the continuous dribble. And finally, our comrade GBW says, if this doesn't happen, as he says, I can see civil war culminating in the US.
Well, we're always predicting that, but it hasn't happened for quite some time. I think the danger of civil war in the US is much less now than it was when the perception was that they were trying to kill Donald Trump. Of course, they might still kill him, God forbid, but when it looked like they were ready to destroy him by any means necessary, including physical elimination, there was a genuine danger of civil war. But now that Trump is in with a landslide, the pussy hats are on the march, but they're pussies, most of them. Thank you very much indeed, Gayatri. Sorry I can't take you for chips tonight. Let's take a final call, maybe more than one, but Horiana is in New Zealand on globalism. How perfect. Go ahead, Horiana.
Hi, kia ora, George. Kia ora in my native Maori tongue means greetings to you. Greetings to Gayatri. Lovely to always hear you, Gayatri. It seems to me, George, and I've got to agree with you, that the elite within the Anglosphere nations are attempting to buy up our whole planet for themselves, their own rules-based systems. What do you think, George?
Well, it was very interesting, Horiana, that the Mark Rutte, the new head of NATO, the disgraced former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, he said that if we don't spend hundreds of millions of pounds of our taxpayers' money more on weapons and war, then we are all going to have to take Russian lessons or move to New Zealand. That's the respect he paid to the good people of New Zealand. And having visited New Zealand and done a speaking tour in New Zealand, I can tell you that there are few more beautiful places in the world to which you could relocate if that became necessary. Me, I'm taking the Russian lessons instead. It's the case that the warmongers have lost. They thought they could win a war against Russia using the dead bodies of the Ukrainians, and they have failed. They have lost the war. They thought they could keep a warmongering NATO president in the White House. They have lost. Donald Trump is somewhat hostile, certainly skeptical to NATO. He has declared that he will stop World War III. He has declared that he will work closely with President Putin, not just to bring about a solution in the Ukraine, but also in an ongoing atmosphere of amity rather than enmity. If only for that, I say welcome, Donald Trump. Thanks, Horiana in New Zealand. Let's go to Kathy in California on Trump. This may well be the last call. Kathy, welcome.
Hey, George. I was just listening to Greg on your show, and I wasn't aware that you've had Brian Burlatek on there before, but you obviously know of him. And I'm surprised Greg didn't mention
We've had him on several times, Kathy. We've had him on several times, Brian. He's one of the best correspondents.
It's like if I listen to nothing ever again but him, it's so clear because he is completely factual and he does not get into, I'm going to guess about this or analyze this or do this, because they tell you what their plan is every single time. And when I say they, I'm talking about the people that run the United States. And it's just like the Middle East. They made that plan up. It's in writing, and it doesn't matter who's president. They're going to advance that agenda every single time. Now, they have to, like in Syria, Donald Trump wanted to take the troops out. Okay, obviously he didn't. And he also killed Soleimani. So he did his part in advancing that agenda the last time he was in office. Whether they want to make it look whatever way they do, it doesn't matter. He helped to bankrupt Syria. So when he comes in here now and he's making this ceasefire, and obviously we know he's not going to do anything but advance the agenda in the West Bank, it's still advancing the agenda that's been laid out for the Middle East. So, and Greg did an excellent segment yesterday on Mexico, which I'm surprised he didn't mention it, that this is the way they work. They, like with the Middle East, it was terrorism. Now in Mexico, it's the cartels. So the DEA has went in and caused all this chaos with the cartels. Oh my God, now the U.S. has to go in and help protect Mexico. It's like the same playbook all the time. And obviously there's little, they have to tweak it whenever they lose or they have to back off or whatever. But if you look back at every single president advances the agenda set by the people with the money. So it's kind of like...
Yeah, but we stand in the way, Kathy. I mean, it's quite similar to an earlier call that I had. It was the agenda to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to have Gaza free of all Palestinians, to drive them from the north to the south, and then from the south through the gate into the desert, into the Sinai. But they failed to implement that part of the agenda, and the Palestinians have moved back from the south to the north and are now pitching tents amongst the rubble of their houses. None of that was in their plan. Their plan was confounded by the resistance of the Palestinians on the ground, the resistance of their allies in the region, and the mass movement of people around the world in solidarity with them. It's kinetic. It's not something you can write down in a plan and just advance it. It will advance if you don't resist it. If you resist it, you have a chance to stop it. That's the overriding point that I have been trying to make. Anyway, on this bitterly cold night, I envy you being in sunny California. Now, in the last few minutes, the new MOATS website has gone live. There it is, moats.tv. Please check it out. On there, you'll be able to watch the show live. Now, this is important. When we're getting all these cyber attacks, we got another one during my monologue, apparently, which may have affected the quality of your viewing. When we run the risk of being deplatformed by any of these big tech bros who might decide at any time they no longer want to allow us house room, you'll be able to watch it on our own website. You'll be able to see all the clips from our interviews, watch my monologues in full, and here's an important point, our new and improved donation feature. Please, please, if you value the show, click on the Donate Now button anywhere on the site and donate whatever you can afford in any currency you like. One-off donations are welcome, or even better, recurring donations, either every week, month, quarterly, or year. £1, $10, €20. The new easy-to-use form is ready and waiting at moats.tv. And remember us in your will. The results of the cold snap still to come. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you, notwithstanding the interruptions at the beginning of the show. Please support us on the website, moats.tv. I'll be back, God willing, on Sunday, reunited with my loving wife, and we'll be together around the same table again. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.